Himanshi, thank you for your words of welcome, and thank you all for being here this evening. It's one of the pleasures of being part of a poetry scene, a literary scene, an art world, that the people you admire also become friends, or you're friends with people whose work you admire, and there's no real, I would say, sense of a conflict between life and art for many of us. So the pleasures of friendship and collegiality and sharing work, I think, play a major role for how many of us as writers conduct our lives. And so this occasion for me is very, very special, because it's an opportunity to bring together and hear from three friends who have known in different parts of my life, and to bring them together into this kind of symphony is, for me, a real privilege. So Ruth, Stephen, Geeve, thank you all for accepting this invitation and for agreeing to share your work. And what we thought we would do is really, rather than have practicing poets speak on generic and abstract subjects, is really to have them speak from their practice, and indeed to speak their practice. So what we're going to do is really to hear Ruth, Stephen, and Geeve read from their work, and then we'll have a round of conversation, and then we'll open this up as well to a discussion with all of you. So I'm going to actually begin by inviting Ruth Badel to read from her work, and take this opportunity also to congratulate you on your new book, Tidings, Ruth. Yeah, and it's wonderful that we're hearing it the first time. I mean, Bombay is where it's read from in public for the first time. Great. Would you? Yeah.
Well, thank you. Is this on? Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much, Ranjit. It's such a pleasure to be here with all of you and with my dear colleagues. I'm going to start in honor of the place with a little poem that I wrote quite a long time ago, out of the great art critic Ernst Gombrich. He curated a show at the National Gallery on shadows that are cast shadows in painting, the history of how painters suddenly saw that they could paint a shadow, partly because we have a painter poet and an art critic poet here, and it's in honor of them too. But it comes for the Mahabharata. Indian princess picks lover out of gods. Thank God we cast a spot of shadow in our lives, said the Mahabharata bride, facing 5 versions of her groom. The man himself, plus 4 male gods, 4 dead spit images, self-xeroxed in his shape, who recognized that heartbeat, the man she'd have to part with by the shadow at his heel. Gods don't go round casting shadow. Things we do and feel, as a leader in The Independent put it afterwards, are incomplete, imperfect, therefore real. Thank you. I once heard a colleague of mine say, "You don't need to clap all the poems. They won't mind if you leave it all to the end." So I'm very happy with my poems, don't mind too. This poem I actually wrote in Mumbai, and it's dedicated to Geeve Patel, and he was kindly offered to put me up in his studios, and it's really about a painting of his. This is from a book about migration, and it's about the migrant workers who come and make the motorways in a big city like Mumbai. The letter home. You painted the Saturday queue for a letter writer, cross-legged on a shawl in shadow of the unfinished flyover. I have health, again and again. I am sending the money home. But what is home? Where you began, where a sister with a husband whose salary is regular but he resents you anyway, this indigent who sees more of the world than he, has turned your family against you while you are gone. Or where the journeys take you, where work is, when you sleep behind plastic tacked to Uranus breeze block and cook at the edge of a 5-lane you are helping to build, watched by ashy-necked crows who make their nests out of sanitary towels from mounds of trash to the east. We are breaking stone for the motorway. I will come home when work is done. Under the luminous fuzz that does for stars in this city, you look into the well, wondering where it went wrong, what you could have done better. Look up. The hurt sky is bandaged in cloud. Earth has reversed her magnetic field, and the Mumbai monsoon, blown sideways like glycerine skirts, has calmed the grit that gets everywhere into wet silk paintable gleams, reminding us where it has come from, this element we all desire and have to struggle with. Home, the round white pebble with a blue cut heart, whole geological dowries of copper, hooded turquoise, amethyst. Give has a new show coming in January, so you must all go and see it. I don't think that painting is going to be in it, though, is it? So the letter home won't be in it. No. Well, I'll keep on the subject of art, but this is another art, the art of pottery. And the Japanese have an art called kintsugi, Kintsugi. And it's the art of mending. It was discovered by a potter who had spent years, a lifetime, making a beautiful pot and then dropped it on the stone floor. And he put it together with something, you'll hear the recipe in the poem. And so once it is mended like this, it sells for much, much more money. It's much more beautiful and much more expensive. You can look up kintsugi, Google it, and see these beautiful things like lightning flashes through it. But there's one catch. You mustn't drop it on purpose. It has to be dropped on accident. So I've changed this to Chinese pottery because I know Chinese pottery a little better. But it's still, the metaphor is still there. On the art of kintsugi. Just as a Chinese master in kilns of Longquan dropped a Qingbai bowl that took years to make, trying for the perfect luster, shadow green patina, faint turquoise wash over wafer-thin kaolin, with an uneven rose glow at the edge, inviting the onlooker to contemplate. Just as he picked the shards off the stone floor and soldered the crazed, apparently irrevocable breaks with zigzags of lacquer, resin, and powdered gold. And then, what do you know? It was valued in the markets of Jingjizen beyond the price of Buddha's hand citron and emperor's glaze. Worth more, so much more, for the brokenness. So But no, wait, it's not what you're thinking, that I smashed what I had, true featherware translucence, to smithereens for the sake of upping the price or even the wonder. It was accident, slippage through fingers, that wrecked my once-in-a-moon celadon. But after the shock came the joy of finding and then bringing back to the world. This is porcelain we're talking of here, not a life. What was, or what could have been, lost. So I've just been at the session on climate change, and we're all thinking really about brokenness and what could be lost and how it can be fixed or brought back. So my new book, Tidings, is, of course, tidings are for ebb and flow, the tide of sea coming up or down. But also good tidings are often used in Christmas messages, glad tidings of great joy. And I called it Tidings. I was asked by my editor to do a book on Christmas, and I thought, help, I can't do that. It's too easy to do the sentimentous. I don't want any of this, thank you very much. And then I thought, well, I should, because Christianity, which is the notional religion of my country, is about charity and kindness to everybody. And again, in my country, it's extremely cold at Christmas time, and homelessness has gone up in the borough I live in, which is close to central London. In the last 2 years, it has gone up 37%. So there are that many more people sleeping out of doors all winter. And it's quite extraordinary. It's sort of like denial. You walk down the street and people are asking you for money in this very cold temperature the whole time. I know things are different here, but it's something that has been growing and growing. And there are crisis centres for homeless at Christmas, but they don't stem the tide. We have so many immigrants, there's so much mental health. It's a completely tragic situation. And I thought, all right, if I'm going to write about Christmas, I'm going to write about this too. So this is narrated by an angel. I had fun finding angels' names. There are an awful lot of them. He's a male angel, and he's called the Angel of Silence. And it is around this little church, which is on the cover, which is actually based on a 5th century church, very near King's Cross, where I live. And it's called Old St. Pancras, because St. Pancras was an immigrant to Rome. He was 14 when he was martyred, when his head was chopped off, or a leopard ate him, according to the story. And so I think this is about ancientness in the place where you live. It's about sanctity, and it's about seeing what is really there. The voice of silence. I am the oldest angel, the dark side of the brain. Everything untold, suppressed, unseemly or wild is under my protection. I am Karum, angel of silence. I am the seed of fire in a hearth you thought was cold. The stillness when you step into moonlit snow, and who you are in private. I appear whenever surface cracks, luster and veneer rub thin. Silence, you say, when you make room for wonder. I am less and less here, but tonight, for 24 strange hours in the darkness of the year, I have a voice. For this is Christmas Eve, when everything hidden comes alive. Toys that have rolled under a sofa or stayed in the cupboard unplayed with for years. The mice you weren't aware of in the wall. And your own unspoken longing to be given a little more by life. Suddenly, if you listen, all unnoticed things can talk. And so can I. Tonight, I play a part in everyone's secret search for something better. Come with me to St. Pancras Old Church on a little London hill ruined with 20 centuries of human stories. Nearby, shops are closing on Camden High Street, Euston Road. The sky is that bruised colour you hardly think is sky, and sodium lights from the station terminal flicker on glass sides of the bus shelter, like a zodiac on mica. London's neon glory falls on wet purple tarmac of Royal College Street and its last-minute traffic, on roadworks, traffic cones, surveillance cameras above the door of a homeless hostel, and the final Eurostar before the Christmas break. Below us, evening pads down Pancras Road and pokes its nose through shy, half-open doors of girls tying last-minute mistletoe, while young men, fresh from the gym, zip back the first ring pull of lager. People are trickling through the gates, up the path, round the monuments and into church, a stream of fur-trimmed anoraks and trailing scarves for the children's service. Those two figures, hurrying because they're late, are Sue and her daughter, Holly. Holly is 7. She's a pony, prancing on the firefly shimmer of LED light-bringer trainers through a 1,000-year-old arch on the bank of the River Fleet, long covered over, like the secret hopes hidden in every soul which might flare out tonight in joy or disappointment, in a loneliness hardest to accept this time of year, or else might bear new fruit. That's why I'm here. I belong with secrets kindly kept, with possibilities, with mute. For what might a mysterious birth, witnessed by distant shepherds and foreign kings, the longings conjured up by giving, gift and given, and this time-stopping rift in every schedule. Yes, what can Christmas do to all of us? Thank you.
But you were very good about it. Stephen, you're on next. Yep.
Hello, friends. New friends, everyone here at the Mumbai Litfest. I want you to remember me now, while you still like me before I've read my poems. Keep this in your mind. I would also like to echo what a beautiful sentiment, a genuine one. I feel it absolutely too. There is nothing more than friendship. If it's through poetry, fine. Who cares? Whether it's poetry or gardening or cooking, I could care less. But friendship and travel and to meet new people. This is a profound thing. Thank you so much, Ranjit. Such a pleasure, such a pleasure. So I'm just going to read a small selection of poems from my next book, which is coming out early next year. So no one here in India has heard them before, for sure. So that's nice for you, it's special. And I don't really know what they're about, so enjoy. It serves me right to suffer. From the trouble of the world comes melting seas which form land, from which plants grow, and so I turn grass. Sleeping curled, legs broken in a cell, calling for water, retracting my politics to eat in various houses of disaster. In the hours of troubled memory before I fall asleep, I remember all those cruel comments online and the smiling fish I ate willingly, descaling their backs as though I were unwrapping a present. Bears won't attack me. A friendly history of vegetarianism, that which lurks in the shadows. Livia says bread is in the nose and throat. Beasts were tame when she said that. Tracing back the relationship between food and life, we see that it stems from a chemical reaction. Sunlight builds up complex compounds within plants which can be used by animals when consumed and then stored by them, and energy to grow and breed. And that's not enough for you. To see it become a component of fertile soil, the metabolic process by which a living organism puts off the onset of decay, merely assimilating, from the Greek meaning change or exchange, organisms consume food and exude waste. Bears attacked me. They're so delicate. That's why they are those above who can't be loved, asking, why can no one love me? Like a blind animal biting my arm, this evening is a letter of correction. The animal follows water, compulsion follows nature into a magazine. There have been 2 marathons to suffer. One was running, the other was a poetry reading. With 2 dogs, 2 female dogs, I collaborate. So if we could have a quiet debate for the letter of the sun that burns permanently into my brain, I can say it was a bitch surrounded by the suffering of museums. Good day. Sometimes the story, like the man who imagines he is special to the prostitute, like life, goes on and on and on and on so long you wonder if it's a parody of its own length. The next happy number, Aren't You the Lucky One, with an epigraph by Joseph Brodsky. Culture is elitist by definition. The difficulty is the loss of memory, but thumbs are good for keeping records, compressing buttons. I am clearly a room, one of 4 faces admitting I'm a human face now defaced. A pig boy with fierce form at the back. Which do I put forth? The knuckles through nettles, as an animal past it, having fulfilled lives. That's why we replace me, as I would die of old age otherwise. I'm sorry your life has been so rough, being surprised by harm. A global ice cream headache, with an epigraph by Hans Magnus Enzensberger. Skipping the trouble of abandoning thought to the wolves, a nose ring is your favourite trinket. In such fair weather you'll get such friends. Volume spoiling in the menu. The clouds gather. I hate my companions, and this destroys morale. I give up. I watch for a tall bridge. The forests I have never seen are cut down. Peasant children cannot take revenge. They will birth when of age, only a kind of conscious bracket where they can only be friends with each other and can only stay where placed. I am in remembrance. So please do not sit next to me. There are other seats on the train, though I know this is the last thing you want to hear. To dislike frailty and to stuff it down deep in the bowels until it becomes a pack and uses the body weight of masses to bring us down. Lemon Party. And it has an epigraph by Horatio Costa. The furious animal swallows its own halo. Firstly, a great length of trade. Shake off that cancer, will the tumour into a hard blue rock, like fame, which grants the possessor the power to defeat disease as though it were a competition and not a flood. Can we wander about museums without a guide? What is the German word for that? What various artifacts add to our regret? Taking in the immense grandeur of a reconstructed skeleton, bemoaning the massive destruction visited upon populations over the last century while threatening species with smell and muscle. We are alike, you and I. You're hungry, scrawny, rude. and we both take the reins. So to finish my stand-up comedy set, you'll find a bee and sting me with it. And has an epigraph from Peter Riley, I'll book myself a bee-hunting bee. The length of bodies stacked end to end allows more room for the numbers to be known by many. Bodies become rides across the sand. They get icy. They become the brick in walls, splitting the lands of a baron, dividing the museum from the living quarters. In the court, there are still those who kneel for mercy, still robes becoming entangled in stirrups, still people falling from horses. They land in the mud, into the ether, namely, that which is not and need not be. That which was once a vision and is now reality. And knowing that, I tell you, it is all a wholly untrustworthy path, for you cannot know what is not. Our universe with no other purpose than its own existence. Happy day, bye-bye.
Give, Stephen, thank you. There was a distinct thrum, but there are continuities which I hope we'll gather up in the conversation. Give, could I have matched it for you? Let's start.
I've spent like about 35 years of my life practicing medicine. I was a GP. I worked for 2 years in rural India and then for the rest in Bombay. And so I have a largish set of poems which deal with medical practice. I know that doctors are supposed to be very humane people and that they are very caring and all of that. And I'm sure that's true. It is largely true. But I think that the doctor's experience is also very complex. And our writers need to be honest. And so I try to bring in some of that complexity into these medical poems. This is public hospital, and it's the experience of a young doctor, one of his first encounters with the public hospital, working in a public hospital. How soon I've acquired it all. It would seem an age of hesitant gestures awaited only this sententious month. Autocratic poise comes natural now. Voice sharp, glance impatient, a busy man's look of harried preoccupation, and not embarrassed to appear so. My fingers deft to maneuver bodies, pull down clothing, strip the soul, give sorrow ear up to a point, then snub it shut. Separate essential from suspect tales, weed out malingerers, accept with patronage a steady stream of the underfed, pack flesh in them, then pack them away. Almost, I tell myself, I embrace the people, revel in variety of eye, color, cheek, bone. Unwelcome guest, I may visit bodies, touch close, cure, throw overboard necessities of distance, plunge, splice, violate, with needle, knife, and tongue, wreck all my bonds in them. At end of day, from under the flagpole, watch the city streaming by the side of my hands. Post-mortem. It is startling to see how swiftly a man may be sliced from chin to prick, how easily the bones he has felt whole under his chest for 60, 70 years may be snapped, with what calm liver, lung and heart be examined, the bowels noted for defect, the brain for hemorrhage, and all these insights that have for a lifetime raged and strained to understand be dumped back into the body, now stitched to perfection before announcing death due to an obscure reason. This is an encounter in the hospital with a young sick child, and the poem is called Catholic Mother, and it is subtitled, Your Child at Hospital. She's the youngest of 3, you said. She's always been so, sickly. And you smiled. The child responded, but turned shyly away. We were all 3 barely perturbed. And so you were trustful, open, not alien to objects, touching cups, bottles, her hair, shared by the sunlight that was breaking over the weeds, and peaceful that your child was breathing in the quiet afternoon dazzle. But then, when it struck, when her eyes began to paper and drugs were ineffective, the room recoiled and I saw you become private before relations could come to join into your pain. I can see that your people have more right to you now than I. Aunts and uncles will be closer. But before I let you leave, pious woman, your weeping soft, unrebellious. From what perverseness do I oppose for you? Your simple, original trust before the present horror. I'll now read you a small group of very class-conscious poems. Servants are a fact of life in India and in some other countries. And again, it's a very, very complex relationship. It is one that causes me a great deal of pain and confusion. And so one way of trying to get over that is to write a poem. So this poem is called Servants. They come of peasant stock, truant from an insufficient plot. Lights are shut off after dinner, but the city blur enters, picks modulations on the skin. The dark around them is brown and links body to body, or is dispelled, and the hard fingers glow as smoke is inhaled and the lighted end of tobacco becomes an orange spot. Their hands are wide or shut. It does not matter one way or other. They sit without thought, mouths slightly open, recovering from the day, and the eyes glow into the dim, but are not informed because never have traveled beyond this silence. They sit like animals. I mean no offense. I have seen animals resting in their stall, the oil flame reflected in their eyes, large beads that, though protruding, actually rest behind the regular grind of the jaws. My grandfather had a large estate in Danu district, and the labor on the estate was tribal, Warlis. At the age of 16, I had a very special feeling for this village of laborers, and it has haunted me all through my life. And just so that I should give the other point of view, maybe my grandfather's point of view, here's a poem, a short one, which is called Grandfather. And the poem is his voice. He's talking to me. But for what, tell me, do you look in them? They've quite exhausted my wonder. Difficult, ungrateful, double-faced, unreliable. I have dealt with the peasantry over 3/4 of a century, and I fail to follow your thinking. Dismissal. It's clear enough, the poem. Dismissal. He stands awkwardly, sheepishly, to receive his last pay. The dog sidles up to him, thinking of their walk routine. But he is a scent the dog will soon forget. The child looks to him for attention. He half acknowledges the child, absent-mindedly. He has other things to worry about. He will soon forget the child. The child will not forget him. And this last poem from the group on servants is called Dusting. The rings on Ramesh's fingers scratch the glass of my bookcase. I tell him to take off the rings. He does so. They dent into the isinglass of my eyes. Sorry. This poem is dedicated to Ranjit Hoskote, and it was written after seeing a performance of his play Karna, which was directed and staged by my daughter. It's a beautifully written play, and it talks about the well-known encounter in the Mahabharata between Karna and Indra. And the title of the poem is Mold, as a snake molds, M-O-U-L-T, is for Ranjit Hoskote. The sodden dripping weight which he bolted and offered to the god who received it in cupped hands. Was it skin, really? Or rather something amphibious, half metallic scales, half mutely screaming integument, smelling of fish, while flayed Karna shivered from a cold he had never thought to endure. Shivered animal-like, a beast prepared for the cooking pot, and walked to the battlefield, certain to be pierced by the first lance aimed at him. But the burden, amazingly, it had lifted. And might it not be one's heart's desire fulfilled to die unrehearsed of lightness?
Thank you, Deep.
Last poem. I have to have a last. Sorry? Squirrels in Washington. This poem is about distances. You know, there are always distances between people, distances between animals, distances between, there are boundaries between trees and you, between things and you. And this poem is kind of, is meditating around this question of boundaries, distances, closeness. And there's a reference towards the end of the poem to the Greek forest nymph, Daphne, who was about to be raped by the god Apollo, and then she's rescued by the forest gods. She is transformed into a tree. So she metamorphoses from a woman into a tree. So she breaks the boundary between two different kinds of beings. And that's how the poem ends. It's a very questionably happy, unhappy fate. But anyway. Squirrels in Washington. Squirrels in Washington come galloping at you on fours, then break to halt a few feet away and beg on hindquarters. No one stones them, and their fear is diminished. They do halt, even so, some feet away. Those few feet, the object of my wonder. Do I emit currents at closer quarters? Are those the few feet I would keep from a tame tiger? Is there a hierarchy then of distances that must be observed? and non-observance would at once agglutinate all of nature into a messy, inextricable mass. Ah, Daphne, passing from woman to foliage, did she for a moment sense all vegetable sap as current of her own bloodstream, the green flooding into the red? And when she achieved her final arboreal being, shed dewy tears at dawn for that lost, fleeting moment, that hint at freedom in transit between cage and cage.
You know, after those 3 glorious readings, as I believe they say somewhere in the Star Trek series, discourse is futile. but you know, I think we have time for a set of, I actually quite genuinely hesitate to plunge into questions, but there's a kind of, there are continuities and encounters here that I think we might usefully explore. Ruth, let me begin with Tidings, actually. Tidings, the new book. It just strikes me that what you've done there is to take Christmas as a myth out of all the saccharine that surrounds it, and to remind us of the very urgent and rather bloody circumstances of the myth. I mean, the massacre of the innocents, the flight into Egypt, the fact that the Savior is born in a colony of an empire. I mean, these are features of the myth that tend to get lost because of the cribs and all of this that we more commonly associate with it. But I want to try and draw a line between your training and your early work as a classicist and the persistence of myth in your work and how you revisit the ground of myth to make it relevant to all the urgencies of the present time. Could you speak to this?
Is this on? Is this on? Okay. Yes, how interesting you picked that up. And also interesting coming after Daphne, the Greek myth of Daphne turning into a tree, and the squirrels in Washington, and the distances between us all. I started off doing ancient Greek myth and tragedy and anthropology, and thinking about how myth is really, Greek myths, for the Western world, are part of the grammar of our thinking. And the more I talk to Guy, the more I understand that the Indian myths are part of thinking here, that everybody is thinking in terms of these things, to think about their own relationships to the world, the environment, and each other. And with this, I mean, I'm not a Christian. I mean, I was born with Darwin on one shoulder because my great-grandfather was a Darwin, and Freud on the other because my father was a psychoanalyst. So the first time I really met religion in any form was when I went to school and sang hymns. Who were those two? What was this about? You know, I didn't know. And I suppose it was through music, which is a form of communion, of people sharing patterns, I think, is one of the things that comes in. So with the Christian myths, I live in a nominally Christian country, and I was very seriously looking at the stories around the nativity of Jesus. And they're different, and why doesn't Matthew, of 1 out of 4 Gospels, why does he bring in the massacre of the innocents? And it is quite awful, the 3 wise men, actually, I think they were passé. Yes. They followed the star, and they went to the Herod, king of the Jews, and said, "Where is the king of the Jews?" And Herod said, "That's me." And they said, "No, we've seen the star, and we're following the king of the Jews." And so he got very suspicious, and he said, "Well, when you found him, tell me where he is, so I can go and worship him."
On the one hand, and the heat and dust on the other. It's a false binary, but it's a useful one. Could I ask you to talk about how you work in your own practice between a deep interest in avant-garde literary practices, which are unpredictable, which are performative, and on the other hand, you're also able to do perfectly well-behaved reading, like you did this evening.
Thank you so much. I loved your paraphrasing of the Borg, by the way. That's my kind of myth. Shout out to the Borg. I think there's a lot of terrible smugness around the notion of the avant-garde, and there's a lot of misconceptions about the notion that it's connected to a very specific temporal political moment 100 years ago in Central Europe. Fundamentally, what I'm interested in is certain ideas that are best reached, in my opinion, by certain practices, methodologies, which I've found in what's known as the avant-garde. And I suppose if I was generalizing and being quite rapid for the sake of politeness, it would be the notion of being interested in the future rather than the past in my work. As a human being, I read myth, anthropology, theology with great passion, and I look to the past to learn from it. But actually in my work, I'm fundamentally interested in the notion of the future in a world where 40 years ago our population has doubled and we have the internet, which we couldn't have imagined. To be ready for information and language to be beamed into your brain for the future of communication across the planet, I want to be prepared for that. That's my interest. And the avant-garde came up with strategies with the future facing. And the second element of that is potential. If I see a poem on the page, I worry about the negative white space, the font, the size of the font, the way most poets, frankly, don't. It's left to designers or to artists to worry about context. And so I'm deeply concerned with the notion of the future and the notion of context. So that in no way rules out the notion that I would mine the English or the European tradition to write things that are relatively literary, but within those poems, hopefully that sensitivity to the notion that the language is fragile and that it's a material, which is my main possession, I say, comes through too. And it makes me sad sometimes that people, because I'm associated with that word, and sometimes they do very strange works, because I think the world is strange and life is fundamentally strange, would think that would rule out more literary endeavours, because I think they're bonded through concept, maybe not through association.
The avant-garde is one kind of past that is always looking towards the future. I want to bring that to you, Keith, because you've mined a very particular kind of past in the poems you chose to read. I was deeply struck by your choice of poems today.
I didn't get that.
I was deeply struck by your choice of poems today. And it's something that, ever since I first read you, frankly, at school, and then onward, I've had this relationship with your poems because there are these poems which look closely at the feudal experience, the landowning experience. And then there are other poems which are of a completely different nature from the early part of your work. And that's always resonated strongly for me because I have a feudal landowning past as well, but I'm not as close to it as you were. And I was always queasy about how one handled these questions. So it's something that, if you could speak to that, over the years, how have you dealt with, you bore witness to that experience in the 60s and 70s. Many of the poems you read come from that period. But at the same time as you were out in the villages, in a different kind of role as a medical practitioner. So how do you deal with this question or this problem of class and class asymmetry? Is now, from this point, looking back at your early poems.
We deal with this as a person who's living a certain kind of life, or deal with it as a writer?
As a writer.
Well, the poem Dismissal, which I read, was a very decently written poem. So it's not from the 60s, which only tells you that the presence of extreme class distinctions in our country, which I've experienced from childhood onwards, and I think which a huge number of people in this country would have experienced from both ends, is a haunting thing, and it seems to have no solution. And that's why I write poems.
We'll deal with this later. Okay, literally 2 questions from the floor. Say again. Okay, really? Well, we're close to being out of time. Why don't we conclude with a poem each, from each of you? Are you armed? Are you equipped?
You've not got a poem on you of your own, have you, Ranjit? Why don't we finish with one of your poems, my friend? Go on. No.
Thank you, Stephen. But, I'm going to play the chair.
I'll read one about. Okay, this is this book is set in. Actually, I'm going to read one after the distance. This is called "To Speak of Distance." Resonate. I love the way poems speak to each other, whether it's your own poem or somebody else's. It's one of the things that. It's rather like paintings in a gallery speak to each other. And I suppose this is concerned with different sorts of religion. To speak of distance. To speak of distance and the sanctuary lamp. Something you have to do or find. Add a darkness to escape. Never mind rumours of an immigration gate. Revamp the passport. Speak of hope, that anchor bird born on the site of loss, with 1,000 resistance strategies frosting her wings like charms or ancient pilgrim songs embossed in the Book of Psalms. The task is to assimilate, to move between the languages, in your case, Arabic, Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek, and map your journey to the shrine. Every crossing is a pilgrimage. The hard thing is to pass. Harder still to fold those wings and drop the mask. Just do it. Translate old words into new. Through cliffs of fall and fields of black basaltic lava, take fresh bearings for the crossing place. This is the Exodus. Here are the moon and sun appearing upside down or double. Here are stars in satellite positions never seen before, struggling for their music to be heard. And I think I got that. I think that poem partly comes from, Hindi for a crossing place is, for a pilgrimage is also a crossing place. Something, what's the word? That's. So it's an honor of
This is called French Exit, and it has an epigraph by Plotinus, alone with the alone, as we all are. Hunger is the best cook. Its short-range, roving taste pleases the softest palate. That is the lowest common denominator. The retinue of folding chairs will follow you if you let them, giving news of how right you are and of how they were the ones who were wrong. Promises are like leather gloves, embarrassing like wearing sunglasses indoors. A ship sails in with a tricolour flag. A wolf falls into its pit. Through sheer graft, a person forges happiness like a dry dock without time for spying on their love. Thanks.
Quick change artist.
Of sea and mountain. When at a friend's exhibition of paintings, the works are wonderful, and the crowd substantial. And you feel a sinking boredom which you would not have felt had the paintings been yours. Or at a friend's exhibition of paintings, the works are not wonderful, but the crowd as substantial, and you feel pity and anger for and at your friend, for and at the crowd, and at yourself. And on both occasions, you rush from the gallery onto the road to fill your lungs with air that is not bitter with your imperfections. Then, oh, see, I think of you, your unbroken chain of deep salt waters. Or, when a tired, aged woman turns her back on my examination table, and I see the knuckles of bone over her coarse skin stretching, the beaded spine from neck to tail. I feel the blows this back has taken. I know the exhaustion these ribs still try to keep at bay. And I know that this back is mine. That tomorrow I, like her, will fail to withstand the endless burden and will allow the brave tensility at last to fold into a permanent hump. At such times, O mountains, I long for your structure, your seemingly immutable rise and fall.
You know, of the many things poetry does, I think it really points us towards vulnerability on the one side and transcendence on the other. So thank you all, Ruth, Stephen, Give, for your marvelous poetry and the discourse. And thank you all.